My wife and my ex. A conspiracy I never expected. Hello, everyone. I want to share with you a story that turned my life upside down. It's a story about trust, betrayal, and how even the closest people can become your enemies. Imagine this. You have a wife to whom you give all your love and time. You believe she is your rock, your support, your best friend. At the same time, there's an ex-girlfriend who has long been in the past, someone you barely even think about. But then you discover that these two women, so different and seemingly distant from each other, have suddenly united, not for friendship or casual chats, but to destroy your life, to take away everything you love. You think this is a movie plot? No, this happened to me. For a long time, I noticed nothing suspicious. On the contrary, I thought my life was perfect. A loving wife, a good job, and a past left far behind. But then little oddities began to appear. At first, they were hints I didn't take seriously. After all, who pays attention to small details? And then came that moment when one small phrase, casually said by my wife, made me stop and think. She knew something she couldn't possibly know, something I had only ever told my ex. I started piecing together all those odd moments, and suddenly, they formed a clear picture. Everything became obvious when I accidentally saw her phone. Messages between her and my ex. They were talking about me, planning. Their messages were so detailed, so filled with hatred and the desire to ruin me, that I was literally speechless. How was this possible? Why did they do it? And most importantly, how had I missed all the signs? Tell me, what would you do if you were in my shoes? Could you take this calmly? Would you fight back? Could you forgive such betrayal? I couldn't just sit idly by. So, I started to act. And today, I'll tell you everything. This was one of the biggest traps of my life. But it all began so innocently that I never suspected a thing. Before I tell you how it all unfolded, you need to understand one thing. My ex-girlfriend wasn't just a random person in my life. She was someone I once truly loved. You know those first serious relationships where it feels like your whole world revolves around one person? That's what she was to me. We met completely by chance, in a bookstore. I was looking for a gift for a friend when I saw her. She was standing there, intently looking at book covers, so focused that I didn't dare interrupt her. But then she looked up and accidentally caught my gaze. It was one of those moments straight out of an old romantic movie. We started talking. She was smart, charismatic, a little sarcastic. Everything that attracted me at the time. Our relationship developed quickly. Shared evenings, endless conversations, trips together. I thought I had found the one person I wanted to spend my life with. But you know what they say? The brighter the flame burns, the quicker it can go out. And that's exactly what happened with us. A year into our relationship, it turned into constant arguments. She started to control my every move. She always thought I was hiding something. At first, I tried to justify myself, to explain, but it only made things worse. By the end of the second year, we could barely talk without fighting. I was exhausted. So, I made the hardest decision of my life. I told her we couldn't continue together. The breakup was bitter. She told me I had betrayed her trust, that I was never who I seemed to be. Her words hurt, but I knew it was the right thing to do. After we broke up, I decided to completely cut ties with her. I blocked her number, deleted our photos. I thought I had left that part of my life behind. But here's the thing. She was always someone who hated to let go. She knew how to hold grudges and was always good at waiting. Maybe that should have been a warning sign. But back then, I couldn't imagine that this woman, whom I was trying so hard to forget, would reappear years later and not alone. For a long time, I wondered, why couldn't she let go of the past? Was it just a desire for revenge? But the worst part was that she found an ally, and not just any outsider. She found my wife. At that time, I didn't know any of this. I thought the past was right where it belonged, in the past, and I began building a new life. But as it turned out, the past doesn't just return. It can turn your future upside down. After my relationship with my ex ended for good, I made myself a promise. No more drama. I wanted a simple and peaceful life. A life without arguments, without pain, without that feeling of constantly being dragged down. I thought I needed time to heal, but everything changed the day I first saw her, the woman who would later become my wife. We met at a party hosted by mutual friends. She was different, calm, confident, with that reserved smile that immediately draws attention. She looked like she knew something no one else did, and I was captivated. I wasn't looking for love, but with her, everything happened naturally. We talked about music, books, travel. It felt like we were perfect for each other. Our relationship developed quickly. I was sure I had found the one. She was the person who made me laugh when I was sad. The one who always seemed like a solid support when everything else in life was going wrong. I was ready to do anything for her, and I thought she felt the same way. Our days were filled with little moments of happiness. Walks in the park, dinners at home, weekend trips together. I loved her so much that I didn't even notice the little things that should have alarmed me. At first, they seemed insignificant. She knew a bit more about me than I had told her. For example, one day, she mentioned my favorite childhood dish, even though I was sure I hadn't told her about it. At the time, I thought maybe she had just guessed, or I had mentioned it casually without remembering. But then things got stranger. Sometimes she would ask about people I hadn't seen or mentioned in years, like my ex. She might casually ask, "How did your relationship with her end?" Or, "Do you ever regret how things turned out?" I saw these questions as simple curiosity, but over time, they started coming up too often. Another red flag was how she reacted to my memories. Once, I told a story about a trip with friends to the sea. Her response was strange. She said, "Oh, is that the trip where you lost your phone and your friends almost left you behind?" I froze because it was true, but I was absolutely sure I had never told her about it. That was the first time I felt uneasy. How did she know that? I asked her directly, and she laughed it off. "Maybe you told me, or maybe I can read minds." I laughed along, but the feeling didn't go away. Over time, these small oddities added up. She became increasingly interested in my past. Sometimes it felt like she knew more about me than I did, but I always found a way to rationalize it. Women are just very observant, right? We remember things men might forget. I only started doubting her when I noticed she avoided certain topics. For example, I once asked her why she was so interested in my past. She snapped back, "It's just conversation. Can't I know about the person I love?" Her reaction was too emotional to be genuine. But again, I reassured myself, "You're overthinking. Everyone has their moments." But that nagging feeling that something wasn't right never left me. It was just a shadow lurking on the edges of my mind. If only I had trusted my instincts back then, maybe things would have been different. But I chose to ignore those warning signs. And that's what allowed her, and my ex, to keep going, to keep acting against me. After dinner, I decided to tidy up the apartment. It was something she always appreciated. For me, it was a way to make her happy. I put on some music, grabbed the vacuum cleaner, and thought I could finally distract myself from work for a bit. But as it often happens, chance has a way of disrupting even the simplest plans. When I reached her side of the bed to put away the book she always read before sleeping, my eyes fell on something unexpected. Her phone. The phone she never left behind. It was a habit of hers that had always slightly annoyed me. She'd even carry it with her to the kitchen. I thought it was strange. She never left it at home. Why was she in such a hurry that she forgot something so important? At first, I didn't even want to touch it. A phone is personal, and I had always tried to respect her privacy. But something inside me stirred, a subtle, almost imperceptible feeling that made me pause. I set the vacuum aside and sat on the edge of the bed. The phone lay there, almost as if waiting for me. In that moment, my hands started trembling slightly. I didn't know why. It was just a phone. But the fact that she left it behind felt off. A thought flashed through my mind. Could there be something on it she wouldn't want me to see? The phone suddenly lit up. It was as if fate itself had handed me a sign. A message appeared on the screen. Just a regular message. But the sender's name threw me off balance. It was my ex-girlfriend. My heart sank. What could she be writing to my wife? How did they even know each other? Maybe it was some misunderstanding? But how could this be explained? I sat motionless, as if afraid to even breathe. My mind needed time to process this. The phone lay before me, its screen casting a faint glow, almost mocking me. I was still trying to find a rational explanation. Maybe they just happened to know each other? Or maybe my wife received the message by mistake. But deep down, I already knew that wasn't the case. My hand moved toward the phone on its own. I hesitated, but curiosity and fear took over. I opened the message. What I saw marked the beginning of the end of my trust in her. But at that moment, I had no idea just how far it had all gone. Sitting on the edge of the bed, I couldn't take my eyes off the phone. It lay there silently, but it promised to reveal so much. My thoughts raced. Why did she leave it? Why now? At that moment, the screen lit up again. It was as if someone, or something, had decided to answer my questions. A message appeared, just a few words, but they carried an immense weight. I didn't even read the text at first. I noticed the sender's name immediately, and that name stopped my heart. It was her, my ex. It hit me like a bolt of lightning. What? No, this must be a mistake. I told myself, but it wasn't a mistake. The name was crystal clear. For a brief moment, I considered that it might be someone else with the same name. But deep down, I already knew the truth. It was her, the woman who had once been a part of my life, but whom I had left in the past. My thoughts began to race uncontrollably. Why is she messaging my wife? How do they even know each other? What could they possibly have in common? Questions flooded my mind, but none of the answers seemed logical. My hands hovered over the phone. Do I have the right to read this? Is it okay to invade her personal life? But then another thought. a louder, stronger one. Cut through me. This involves me. I have to know the truth. I tried several times to put the phone down, but I couldn't. Something inside me, primal and intuitive, compelled me to act. It was more than curiosity. It was a sense of danger, an instinct that always guides you in the right direction. I knew that behind this message was something far bigger than just a casual conversation. I hesitated. Maybe it's just that my wife ran into her somewhere, and they exchanged a few words? But why? And why so late at night? I felt anger mixed with deep fear rising within me. It was like a wave slowly building, threatening to engulf me. I took a deep breath and reached for the phone. My fingers pressed on the message almost automatically. My brain seemed to be bracing me for the worst, but I couldn't even imagine how bad it would actually be. The message was short, innocent words that seemed entirely ordinary, but they struck like a thunderbolt. What have you decided? Has he noticed anything yet? The sender was my ex, and these words were directed at my wife. I sat there, frozen, completely shocked. The words seemed vague, yet every letter screamed at me, "This is a conspiracy." My mind struggled to find a logical explanation, but inside, everything felt like it was collapsing. I could feel my carefully built trust beginning to crumble. I looked at the screen again, as if trying to make sure I'd read it correctly. But the text didn't change. With each passing second, I realized more and more that this wasn't a coincidence. Something was going on between them, something that involved me, and I couldn't ignore it. My hands started shaking. I felt fear and anger welling up inside me. I knew I couldn't back down now. I had to find out everything, because this was just the beginning of a truth that would shatter my world. I began to recall all those moments that had once seemed innocent, her strange questions about my past, her persistent interest in my vulnerabilities. Why didn't I notice this earlier? I thought, but the bigger question loomed. What did I do to deserve such betrayal? Was I too open? Did I give her a reason to think she could manipulate me like a puppet? Another, even more painful thought lingered. Why is she doing this? Doesn't she love me? These words spun in my mind like a broken record. I thought of our best moments together. Our walks, our first trip, even the night I proposed to her. I remembered how she cried tears of joy, hugging me, and for a moment, I had believed I had found my soulmate. But now, those memories felt poisoned. Were her tears real, or were they just part of her act? Then I recalled another message from their conversation. "You were incredible that night. He'll never know how we spent that time." That phrase gutted me. Her betrayal wasn't just emotional or strategic. It was physical. She had been with her. My ex, the woman I had once loved, had now become part of her plan. Or perhaps it wasn't just her plan. Could it have been a mutual initiative? My imagination conjured images I didn't want to see. My wife and my ex together. Was it just one time? Or was it ongoing? Her cold hands that touched me may have already been with someone else. The thought filled me with such disgust and rage that I almost threw the phone to the floor. But I knew I had to uncover more. I needed to understand everything. I began to replay moments when she had been especially kind and tender, but now it all felt fake. It was all part of her plan, and I couldn't help but wonder, did she ever love me? Or was this all just a game? Or perhaps their motives went even further than I could imagine. Another question gnawed at me. How did they manage to manipulate me so masterfully? How did I not notice anything? But the worst part was that this wasn't just betrayal. It was something deeper, a betrayal of the soul, a breach of trust that could never be repaired. I wondered whether she ever had any real feelings for me. Was her love just a means to an end? And my ex? Her hatred and thirst for revenge now seemed like a blazing fire she had fed into our relationship. Their plan was clear, their collaboration seamless, and I was the target they had chosen to destroy. I sat with my head in my hands, feeling as though everything I had once believed to be my life was crumbling. What do I do now? Can I ever forgive this? Or have they gone too far for anything to be salvaged? But one thing was certain. I couldn't sit idle any longer. I had to uncover the whole truth, down to the last detail. After closing the chat, a horrifying puzzle began to take shape in my mind. Suddenly, everything that had once seemed like innocent quirks took on a sinister new meaning. Her odd questions, her knowledge of things I had never told her, her sudden interest in parts of my life she had previously ignored, all now seemed part of a well-thought-out plan. I started recalling moments I had brushed off as mere curiosity. For instance, her questions about my past relationships. Why did you break up with her? You two seemed so happy. At the time, I thought it was just her trying to understand me better. But now I saw it as a way to gather information she could use against me. Another moment surfaced. She knew about my first business, even though I had never told her about it. Over dinner once, she had casually remarked, "You've always been afraid to take risks, even when you started your first project." I remember being surprised but didn't press further. Now it looked different. Who had told her? How did she know these details? Likely my ex, who had been with me during that time. A striking memory hit me like lightning. Once, she had casually mentioned a document stored on my computer, an encrypted personal file with financial plans. "Your presentation looks very professional," she had said, offhandedly, as if it were a compliment. But now I realized she must have seen it. That file was password protected, and I had never given her access. How had she seen it? She must have either hacked into my computer or received the information from someone who knew my habits, someone like my ex. But the worst memory wasn't about documents or conversations. It was the night she convinced me to sign over joint access to my account. Back then, she had said, "We're a family. I want everything to be transparent between us." Without hesitation, I had agreed. But now, I saw it as part of their plan. Access to my finances opened all the doors for them, and now I was sure they had used that access to their advantage. Another peculiar moment came back to me. One evening, she had come home with a small package she carefully hid in the closet. I asked her what it was, and she smiled, saying, "It's a surprise for you. You'll see later." But I never saw it. She never showed me what was inside. At the time, I thought it was just something trivial. Now, I knew it wasn't. What were they hiding? What had she been preparing with my ex? This wasn't just a casual chat. It was a long-term conspiracy, meticulously planned. Every step she took was calculated, every action deliberate. They wanted everything: money, control, power, and possibly even more. Their plan wasn't just to ruin me financially, but to exact personal revenge. I replayed her tone, her gestures, her words from the past months. It all seemed fake now, like a theatrical performance. She had been playing a role, and I had been nothing more than a tool in their game. But the most chilling realization was how far they had gone. This wasn't impulsive. It was a conspiracy that had been brewing for a long time. I sat there, stunned, with hundreds of questions swirling in my head. What else are they planning? Is this the end? Or is the worst yet to come? How did I become so vulnerable? And most importantly, how do I take back control of my life? As I read on, each new message hit me harder than the last. This was no random conversation. It was their shared strategy, a detailed plan with ruthless steps aimed squarely at me. My ex initiated. I always knew he was weak. Even back when we were together, he thought he had control. But in reality, he was always dependent on someone stronger. It was disgusting to watch. Her words cut me like a knife. She didn't just hate me for the past. She despised me. Her messages were dripping with venom. I couldn't show him back then, but now we have the perfect chance. I want him to pay for everything, to end up with nothing. My wife replied, her words shattering any remaining hope. You're right. He's so trusting it's laughable. He believes everything I tell him. I'm tired of being with him, but before I leave, I want to teach him a lesson. It's time to put him in his place. I couldn't believe what I was reading. The woman I loved, trusted, and considered my best friend was now mocking me with someone I had tried to forget. They discussed me like a project, a target to be destroyed. They began discussing concrete steps. My ex wrote, his reputation is all he values. Let's destroy it. I've drafted a few emails I plan to send to his colleagues. They'll learn who he really is. After that, no one will want to work with him. My wife responded with chilling ease. That's a great idea. I'll handle the financial side. He gave me access to his accounts. A few big transfers might raise suspicion, but he won't suspect me. By the time he figures it out, it'll be too late. A wave of anger swept over me. They didn't just want to ruin me. They were reveling in it. They were carrying out their plans with an enthusiasm that made it all the more unbearable. But the worst was yet to come. My ex asked, how is he in bed? Is he even capable of that? My wife replied, that hasn't mattered for a long time. You know, it was much more exciting with you that night. I think if we do it again, I might forget he even exists. Those words were the final blow. Their connection wasn't just a conspiracy. It was a physical betrayal. My wife and my ex, together, had used me, betrayed me, and humiliated me. At that moment, I realized this wasn't just about betrayal. It was a calculated destruction of everything I thought was real. My love, my trust, my life. It had all been part of their game. And now, I had no choice but to fight back. I sat frozen, staring at the screen as my mind grappled with the scale of the betrayal. This wasn't just a mistake or a moment of weakness. It was a calculated conspiracy designed to strip me of everything. My reputation, my finances, and my dignity. Now, I understood. They were ready to go all the way, leaving me with no chance for escape. My heart pounded, my hands trembled, but one thing was clear. I could no longer stay passive. I had to stop them before they destroyed everything I had worked for. As I held the phone, my emotions surged uncontrollably. Anger, disappointment, and a profound sense of betrayal. My thoughts spiraled into chaos, replaying possible scenarios in my head. Most began the same way. I would call her. Immediately. Right now. I imagined her phone ringing, her seeing my name on the screen. What would she think? Would her voice remain calm, as always? Or would panic creep in? What if she instantly realized that I knew? If she answered, I'd hear the voice that once brought me comfort. But now it would only be a mask, another lie, another performance. I pictured myself shouting at her, confronting her with screenshots of the messages. How could you? What is this nightmare? But fear quickly followed. What would she say? She was always so skilled at finding excuses. I could almost hear her responses. It's not what you think. She needed help, and I decided to talk to her. I don't understand why you're reacting this way. Or worse, she might shift the blame onto me. This is your fault. You've never told me enough about your past. I just wanted to understand why you're so closed off. We only talked about you because I wanted to know you better. And the worst possibility, she might tell the truth, that it wasn't just a conversation, that it was a betrayal on every level, physical, emotional, moral. I imagined her calmly admitting, yes, I was with her. Yes, we did it. So what now? The image of them together haunted me, my wife and my ex in the same bed where we had once slept. I imagined her smiling at my ex the way she had once smiled at me, touching her the way she had once touched me. The thoughts filled me with a mix of revulsion and pain, but I couldn't push them away. Then another thought struck me. What would calling her now accomplish? She would lie. She always had a talent for it. She would remain calm, collected, and every word would drip with false concern. I love you. You misunderstood. Why don't you trust me? If I confronted her without solid evidence, she'd likely brush it off as a misunderstanding or even make me feel like I was imagining things. She might call my ex afterward, and together they'd laugh at me. He's starting to suspect something, but he's so naive. He won't do anything. And they'd be right. I had no plan, no concrete proof. I had nothing. But then I imagined a different path. What if I gathered evidence? What if I played along until I had enough to expose both of them? I could unravel their plan, destroy their confidence, and reclaim control over my life. That was my only way forward. I couldn't let them win. They had taken my trust, but I wouldn't let them take everything else. My rage began to recede, replaced by a cold, calculated determination. I needed to pause. Calling her seemed like the easiest option, to confront her, to force her to explain. But what would that achieve? She'd twist the truth, deny everything, or worse, manipulate me into doubting myself. Without proof, I couldn't risk acting impulsively. She had always been a master manipulator. Even during arguments, she had a way of turning the situation to her advantage. I'd seen it countless times. Her voice would soften, her eyes would glisten, and I'd lose my resolve. She could appear guilty or vulnerable, but always remained in control. I knew she would try to use those same tactics again. I love you. You know that, she'd say, looking straight into my eyes. I would never betray you. You're everything to me. And what then? Would I believe her? Would I let her words and expressions cloud my judgment once more? I couldn't let that happen. Not this time. I needed a strategy. If she loved intrigue, I would play her game, but on my terms. I would gather every piece of evidence I could. I wouldn't just confront her with suspicions. I'd confront her with undeniable proof. I started thinking about where else she might have left clues. Her laptop? Her email? Old chats? Every detail mattered. She was careful, but even the most meticulous people make mistakes. I remembered her habit of saving photos. She loved documenting everything, from dinners to outings with friends. But what if there were photos that proved her betrayal? Perhaps pictures with my ex, taken during times she claimed to be working late? I decided to check her gallery. I felt like a spy infiltrating enemy territory, but I knew it was my only chance. As I scrolled through her phone, another thought gnawed at me. What if this isn't everything? What if there are clues hidden in places I haven't thought to look? I recalled a moment when she had casually mentioned using an app for secret chats. At the time, I had brushed it off as her curiosity about technology. Now, I realized it might have been part of her deception. I began forming a plan. I didn't just want to prove her betrayal. I wanted to collect enough evidence to leave her no room for denial. I wanted to dismantle her web of lies and manipulation entirely. I wanted her to realize that I now held the power. This wasn't just about seeking the truth. It was about reclaiming control over my life. She thought she could play with me, but now, the rules of the game had changed. I wasn't her puppet anymore. I was the one pulling the strings. This is just the beginning, I thought. If she wants to play a game, I'll show her what a real game looks like. As I sat there, phone in hand, I felt a new strength rising within me. This was no longer about pain or betrayal. It was about strategy, about survival, and I was ready to fight back. Confronting them outright would have been too easy. I imagined walking up to my wife, holding her phone in my hand, and showing her the messages. In my mind, I could already hear her justifications, the lies she would concoct. "It's not what you think," she would say, looking me directly in the eyes. "I did it for us," she might add, the moment she saw my silence. I knew she would have 100 explanations. She had always been skilled at twisting situations to make herself appear the victim. But I wouldn't let her. Not this time. Their betrayal ran deeper than anything I could have imagined. This wasn't an accident or an impulsive mistake. This was a game. A calculated, cold-blooded game where I had been nothing but a pawn. But now, that pawn was becoming a king, and my counterattack would take them completely by surprise. They wouldn't even realize how everything was about to turn against them. I resolved to make this a long game. They needed to believe they were still in control. Their confidence in their victory would become their greatest weakness. As that realization solidified, I felt something new rise within me. A quiet confidence that filled the void left by the pain. It was like a cold fire burning inside me. I was no longer a victim. I was no longer someone they could use. I began to plan my moves. I imagined gathering every piece of evidence, every message, every file, every hidden trace of their deceit. I wouldn't just expose them. I would turn their own game against them. They needed to feel what I had felt. They needed to understand that their betrayal was the beginning of their downfall. But I knew this would take time. I couldn't act impulsively. They couldn't suspect that I knew. Their uncertainty, their doubts, their fear, that would be my weapon. And by the time they realized their plan had failed, it would already be too late. I steadied my thoughts, though it felt nearly impossible. My heart pounded, and my mind struggled to stay focused as a wave of emotions threatened to overwhelm me again. I picked up her phone. This small device was the key to everything, the truth they had hidden for so long. It contained her story, their story. Every message, every detail could serve as evidence. One by one, I started taking screenshots of their messages, filling a folder on my phone with proof. Their words, their tone, their plans. It was all there, frozen in time. But as I captured each screenshot, a thought gnawed at me. This isn't enough. She'll find a way to deny everything. I knew her talent for persuasion and manipulation all too well. A few screenshots were a weak hand in a game where the stakes were this high. The phone was only one thread, but I knew there was more. Her laptop came to mind. I remembered how she often worked late on it, how sometimes she would quickly close the screen when I approached. Back then, it hadn't seemed important, but now it was suspicious. There had to be something there, something she was hiding. Social media, emails, perhaps even hidden folders or apps she used for secret communication. I knew she was careful. She always had a plan. But even the most careful people make mistakes. And I had to find those mistakes. I walked toward her laptop, sitting innocently on the desk. It looked so ordinary, almost harmless. But I knew that was just a facade. Inside, it might hold the truth I was searching for. As I opened it, I recalled the password she had casually mentioned once. At the time, it hadn't seemed significant. Now, that memory was the key to uncovering everything. The screen lit up, and I was greeted by her digital world. At first glance, it all seemed normal. Folders with work documents, photos, and notes. But I knew there was more hidden beneath the surface. This was her mask, her outer layer. I began opening folders, meticulously combing through their contents. Initially, there was nothing suspicious, just reports and old travel photos from trips we had taken together. But then I found one folder that stood out. Its name was an odd jumble of letters, almost as if it were meant to be overlooked. When I opened it, I froze. Inside were files that told a story I never could have imagined. Letters to my ex-girlfriend, each one dripping with resentment and a chilling sense of calculation. They weren't just talking about me. They were planning my downfall. The letters detailed my habits, fears, and vulnerabilities, things I thought she hadn't even noticed. But she had, and she was using them against me. Then I found a calendar of meetings she had kept. Meetings with my ex-dates, locations, and even notes that read like a cold-blooded strategy. They had been working together for a long time. This wasn't a coincidence. It was a plan, thought out to the last detail. And then there were the photographs. Some of them had been taken without my knowledge. At work, at home, even in moments when I believed I was alone. The worst discovery was in her emails. Messages from my ex. One stood out. This will be our victory. He won't even realize how he lost everything. I reread those words over and over. They weren't just conspiring against me. They were enjoying it. With every piece of evidence I gathered, my resolve hardened. This was no longer about heartbreak or betrayal. It was about justice. I couldn't let them win. I began forming a strategy. I wouldn't confront her yet. It would be too easy for her to deflect, deny, or manipulate the situation. She needed to experience the same helplessness and shock I had felt. She needed to believe her plan was working until the very last moment when everything fell apart. This was no longer their game. It was mine. and I would make sure they never saw the end coming. The rules had changed, and I was the one in control now. They believed their plan was flawless, that I was too blind to see through it. I could picture her calm face when she returned home late at night, always attributing her delays to work. Her voice was steady, slightly tired, but without a trace of concern. She was sure she had everything under control. Sure, I believed every word she said. But now, I saw it all differently. Those late nights, the phone calls she always took in another room, the moments her phone would mysteriously go silent. Suddenly, they all made sense. They played with me, thinking I'd remain blind, that my trust would be their greatest weapon. But they underestimated me. They underestimated my ability to see what was hidden. Looking at the evidence, messages, letters, photos, I began to plan my response. I could confront her now, throw all of this in her face, and force her to confess. I imagined standing before her, watching her mask crumble. The shock, the weak excuses, the cracks in her carefully constructed facade. It would be satisfying. But the more I thought about it, the more I realized that it would be too easy, too quick, too painless. She deserved more. Her secrets and betrayals needed to come to light at the moment she least expected. She had to feel what I felt. Her confidence in her victory would be her downfall. She needed to see her own plan unravel before her eyes, to watch as the web of lies she wove trapped her instead. I imagined her slowly noticing subtle hints, small, seemingly innocent moments that would plant seeds of doubt in her mind. She would start to feel uneasy, her confidence shaken. First, she'd question herself, then her plan, and eventually everything around her. This uncertainty would be her punishment. She would come to the realization that I knew everything, but only when it was too late. I understood that this wasn't the end of the game. It was just the beginning. But now, it was my game, and I made the rules. Both she and my ex would understand that they had chosen the wrong person to manipulate. When the time came, I sat her down to talk. She looked at me with the same confidence as always, her smile a familiar mask. But I noticed the subtle signs. Her hands trembled slightly, and she nervously fiddled with her wedding ring. She sensed something was wrong, but didn't yet know how much. I started with simple questions, my tone calm and even. She answered as confidently as ever, but her voice carried a note of unease. I could feel her defenses beginning to crack. Then, I laid the first pieces of evidence on the table, messages, photos, and details she couldn't deny. Her expression changed instantly. Her mask shattered. Her eyes widened. Her smile disappeared, and her hands clenched into fists. She tried to speak, but no words came. This was the moment when all her confidence vanished. Her upper hand was gone. She realized the game was over, and I was the one dictating the terms now. "What does this mean?" she finally stammered, her voice trembling. "It means your games are over," I replied, looking directly into her eyes. "I know everything, and your explanations no longer matter." She tried to explain, to justify herself, but I stopped her. This wasn't about her excuses anymore. This was my victory. Her tears and pleas didn't matter to me anymore. I wasn't the victim she thought I was. I held the strings now. Her betrayal didn't just end our relationship. It marked the start of a new chapter in my life, one where I would never allow anyone to use me again. Now that my story is told, I turn to you, my audience. What would you have done in my place? Could you forgive such a betrayal? Would you allow someone like this to remain in your life? Comment below and share your thoughts. Your answers might help someone going through a similar situation find clarity. Let's support each other and navigate these challenges together. Backhand index pointing down. How would you end this story? Would you walk away? Or would you make them regret every move they made against you? Let's find the answers together. Your voice matters.